So this video lesson is just a review of the process for subtracting with negative integers. It won't be a full explanation, just a review of the process, some of the terminology and the ways that we think about it, and then it will have 12 practice problems at the end for you. If you do want a full review of the entire process, a more in-depth review, I encourage you to go back to the original subtracting with negative integers video lesson. So now there are two ways that we can think of subtracting generally. The first is as distance on a number line, and as distance on a number line, it helps us interpret what the absolute value of the difference should be, but it doesn't really give us a good indication of whether or not it should be a positive or a negative difference. So when we want to do that and go through with the actual calculations, we talk about it as the inverse operation of addition on a number line. So here we have a number line, and we're going to start with the problem to the right, which is 15 minus 25. Now we've circled 15 in blue, and we know that if we're going to subtract 25, take 25 away, we want to move to the negative direction of the number line. But let's take a look at that idea in comparison to addition. If we were going to add 25 instead, we would just take 25 and we would add it onto 15 on the number line. We would end up at 40, but of course 15 minus 25 can't be the same as 15 plus 25. So instead, we're going to take away this kind of movement, and that is we're going to do it in the opposite direction. So here, if we sort of flipped this around, then we would have 15 minus 25 written as a taking away or an undoing of a movement to the right. If we're moving positive on the number line, when we undo it, we move to the left. And that happens to be the exact same as subtracting 25 on the number line. So if we were subtracting 25, or rather it's the exact same as adding a negative 25. So 15 minus 25 is the same as 15 plus a negative 25. Now that we're more familiar with, we know the addition rules, and let's see if the same is true when we have 10 minus a negative 15. So let's get these arrows out of here. Let's clear up the number line. And now let's start at 10 minus negative 15. Well, here's 10, circled in purple, and we want to take away a negative 15. But what does that really mean? Well, if we were going to add a negative 15, we would move to the left on a number line towards the negative infinity. But here we want to do the opposite of that sort of movement, and the opposite of a movement to the left is a movement to the right. And it turns out that subtracting a negative 15, which is what we get when we turn that around, is the same as adding a positive 15. And so that brings us to the rule for subtracting integers, which is when you subtract integers, we want to add the opposite of the subtrahend. The minuend stays exactly as it is. We want to add the opposite of the subtrahend. In this case, they're highlighted in red. And we've seen this before, so we're going to move on quickly to how we remember that this process is going on and how you remember which number it is we need to change when we're just looking to do calculations quickly. And that's with the three letters KCC, keep, change, change, interpreted as keep the minuend, change the operation to addition, and change the sign of the subtrahend. This is because when we subtract a positive number, we're moving as if we're adding its negative opposite. And when we're subtracting a negative number, we are moving towards the positive infinity as if we are adding its positive opposite. So here's the first of 4 pages, or first of 3 pages rather, with 4 problems each. Go ahead, pause the video, work through these problems, and unpause when you're ready to see the explanations and move on. So for the first problem here, we have 35 minus 70. Again, we're going to keep, change, change. So this becomes 35 plus a negative 70. These are two numbers with different signs. The different signs mean we're going to subtract their absolute values to get 35. Now 70 has a larger absolute value, or negative 70 rather, has a larger absolute value. So the sum or difference here is negative 35. That's the answer we want. For the second one, again, we're going to keep, change, change. Negative 40, change the subtraction to addition. Change a positive 15 to a negative 15. Negative 40 plus negative 15, these numbers have the same sign. So 15 plus 40, moving the same direction away from 0 on our number line, is 55. Both of these add-ins are negative, so the sum is negative, and thus our difference, negative 40 minus 15, is equal to negative 55. For the third one, 18 minus negative 40, the KCC comes up again. 18 plus the opposite of negative 40 is a positive 40, and 18 plus 40 is 58. This is our familiar addition with positive numbers. So 18 minus negative 40 is 48. And finally, the fourth one on this page, negative 85 minus a negative 14. Again, keep, change, change. Negative 85 remains. We're going to add the opposite of negative 14, which is a positive 14. These two numbers have opposite signs, so when we add them, we subtract their absolute values, as their sum will be closer to 0 than the add-in with a larger absolute value. 85 minus 14 is 71, but 85 is negative, or negative 85 rather, is negative, has a larger absolute value, so the entire sum is negative 71, and therefore negative 85 minus negative 14 is negative 71. Moving on to the next four problems, go ahead, pause the video, and come back when you are ready to see the answers and move on. So with negative 17 minus 4, our keep, change, change tells us that this becomes negative 17 plus the opposite of 4, which is negative 4. These are two numbers with the same signs, so when we add them, we add their absolute values. They're both negative, so the entire thing becomes a negative 21. For the second one, negative 9 minus negative 25 becomes negative 9 plus the opposite of negative 25, which is positive 25. These two numbers have different signs, so we're going to subtract their absolute values. When we add them together, 25 minus 9 is 16. 25 has the larger absolute value, so it is a positive 16, and thus negative 9 minus negative 25 is a positive 16. Moving on to the next one, we have 88 minus 105, which is the same as 88 plus a negative 105. These two numbers have different signs, so we subtract their absolute values when we want to add them together. 88 taken away from 105 gives us 17. Negative 105 has a larger absolute value than 88, so it is a negative 17. So 88 minus 105 is negative 17. And finally on this page, 6 plus 6, because 6 minus negative 6 becomes 6 plus the opposite of negative 6, or 6, and 6 plus 6 is 12. Last page of problems. Go ahead, pause the video, come back when you are ready to go through the answers and go to the end of the video. So as with all of the other ones that we've done, negative 11 minus 11 is the same as negative 11 plus the opposite of 11, or negative 11. These two numbers have the same signs, so we add their absolute values when we add them together. They're both negatives, so the sum is negative 22. Thus, negative 11 minus 11 is negative 22. In the next one, we're going to have to go through this with PEMDAS because subtraction itself is not commutative, although we'll talk more about that a little bit later. 35 minus negative 15 is the same as 35 plus 15, which becomes 50. And then we still have the minus 10, 50 minus 10. With these sorts of problems, we could go through the process of making it and adding the opposite, 50 plus negative 10, but we know how to subtract numbers when our minuend is larger than our subtrahend, and they're both positive. This is just 40. So 35 minus negative 15 minus 10 is 40. For the third one, 11 minus a negative 11 becomes 11 plus the opposite of negative 11, which is 11, which is, of course, positive 22. We know how to add numbers when all of our add-ins are positive, and we know how to add numbers whether add-ins are positive or negative. And finally, for the last one, negative 18 minus negative 18 becomes negative 18 plus the opposite of negative 18, which is a positive 18. Any number plus its opposite is 0, so we end up with 0 minus 36, which once we use our add the opposite or keep, change, change becomes 0 plus the opposite of 36, which is negative 36, which of course is just negative 36. So negative 18 minus negative 18 minus 36 is equal to negative 36. And as a brief review, when we subtract integers, we can think about it as movement on a number line or adding the opposite of the subtrahend. So to subtract integers, that's what we do. We add the opposite of the subtrahend, and remember that process. This isn't the rule for it. This is just the trick we use to remember what we're doing with the letters KCC, or keep, change, change.